Hello, you are listening to the 1 Hour Stories podcast with me, Paddy Johnston.
Me, Rob Sherman.
And me, Rob Gordon.
Hello. We are three writers from the city of London. And how does this podcast work, Rob? Do you want to explain?
For each podcast, we are given a theme to write about, and then we have 1 hour to write the story in. During that time, we're not allowed to go back and edit any of it. So whatever's on the page, that's it, basically. Yeah.
No, I haven't reread mine since I wrote it, and I think that might be a good rule to have, because it might be funnier if we...
I have to reread mine either.
Have you not? No, well, we did ours today, and Rob did his a few days ago.
Yeah.
But we all only took an hour to do it, or slightly less. Yeah.
And we all have colds as well, so if there's sniffing...
I don't, but I'm just incredibly nasal anyway.
Okay. So, first up...
we need to say what the theme is.
Oh yeah, what's the theme? But Rob Gordon chose this theme,
Yes.
so are we going to take it in turns to choose the theme?
Yes, we will.
Okay, so you chose this one.
This week's theme is Barry makes a hideous discovery.
Yeah. It's a good plot.
It is.
That's a good one.
been
So,
a good fruit.
first up, Robert Gordon.
Yes.
Take it away.
Okay, my story is called Milk. And here we go. Barry the milkman had one thought every morning. Who the fuck still gets milk delivered? Seriously. It's right there in the supermarket. Why was he necessary? He should have been made obsolete a long time ago. It should be noted that Barry had an almost impressive amount of self-loathing. He did not care for the intricacies of human life, that some people would prefer tradition or the personal touch, or even not having to put up with those 1/2 second of disgust when opening a plastic milk bottle and having that slight resistance from milk crust. No, Barry was objective. And that, like most people who claim objectivity as the most important trait that a human can have, meant that he was a dull, dour, stubborn husk. Barry did not like emotion. He would rather watch the superbikes. And as such, he was a rebel without a cause of the milk delivery world. No pleasantries with customers. It was a transaction, not a friendship. He would have his headphones in, listening to rock music. Calling it classic rock would be doing it too much of a service. It was merely old. If he saw a customer outside of the work environment, he would blank them. At Christmas, he would be left tips, which he would refuse. He would not tip the checkout girl. Why would he be any different from anyone else? At best, he confused his customers. At worst, he terrified them. He did not gain any pleasure from this. After all, he was an objective man. That all changed one day, thanks to Mrs. Tillman. Sweet old Mrs. Tillman, a kind old lady, almost a stereotype of the retired madam. She had been a customer of his for 15 years. During that time, Barry had grown fat and bold. He had been to the doctors to get 5 warts removed. His wife had left him. Her decision to leave him for Derek, the James Hunt of the world of postmen, was entirely objective. Each of the cacti Barry had bought since he died, 7 in total. Meanwhile, Mrs. Tillman had remained the same, just tall enough to be allowed on roller coasters, not that she would ever be on one. Hair grey, still with a hint of blonde. Thick-rimmed glasses, exaggerating the slight and constant worry in her eyes. She was lovely. Barry had no need for her. However, one morning he had a problem. He delivered her milk, 2 bottles, and then went back to his cart. It would not start. He tried several times. Barry fancied himself as a bit of an electrician on the side. He knew that he could fix it. He just needed a bit of help. He went back to Mrs. Tillman's house and knocked on the door. It was early, but as said before, Mrs. Tillman was the archetype of the little old lady. She was up. She was bound to be. And sure enough, she answered, already shawled in an oversized cardigan. Do you want me to do voices, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely do voices.
Yes? Oh, hello, Barry. How are you, my dear? Hello. Cart broken down. Could I borrow a toolkit? Deadpan. Objective. Why, of course, come on in, she exclaimed, pulling the door wider. Barry entered, no word of thanks, his belly pressing past her. Mrs. Tillman picked up her milk and followed him inside. I believe it's in the other room. Sure, Arthur had one lying about. Barry did not know who Arthur was. Dead husband. Son who left home. Dead son. Mrs. Tillman went down the main entrance hall into a back room covered in shelves. She started rooting mild clangs and thuds as she searched. There was nothing flirting behind Barry's next statement, you understand, only curiosity. He just wanted to know something, a fact. Mrs. Tillman, he said, how do you stay looking so young? The clanging stopped. Mrs. Tillman shuffled into the next room. I mean, you've looked this way for 15 years. Around mid-60s. But you must be at least 80, 90 by now. Oh, you're very kind to say so, my dear, and I do have a little technique. Would you like to see? Barry agreed, for science. Well, come along then. Mrs. Tillman beckoned him, led him upstairs. Barry noticed the smell as they reached the first corridor. A festering rot, 1,000 unclogged drains, offal left out in the sun. He held his nose, didn't want to speak in case of inhaling more of the foul stench than necessary. Mrs. Tillman led him to a door, floral patterned, and pushed it open. The bathroom. The smell overpowering. The room was immaculate and lavender, except for one thing, the bath. It was filled to the brim with a congealed mess, a layered congealed mess, built over time. "What is this?" Barry asked, speech muted by the finger still over his nose. "This is my secret," Mrs. Tillman sighed sweetly. She opened the new milk bottles and poured the 2 pints on top of the substance. She then took off her cardigan and everything else. Naked, she sprightly hopped into the bath with a slurp of suction and let out a long exhale. The secret to her youth, 15 years of delivered milk built up over time. "Well," she said, playing with the slop, "don't be shy, hop on in." The end.
Sorry, I really hate old milk.
I was just going to say, Paddy's biggest hate is old milk in the fridge or.
I never knew that.
Yeah, I really.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. You didn't know.
That was horrible. When I saw over your shoulder when she said it was in the other room, and I thought for a second you'd written otter room. And I thought the story was going to go down a route where she had themed rooms with animals, but it went down.
But if there was an otter room, then it would have been a magnificent discovery, surely, not a hideous one.
Well, maybe there was
dead otters.
Yeah, maybe it was full of dead otters crucified.
That would have been horrible, actually.
That was
I wish I'd thought of that.
I love a good otter.
Me too.
Otters are great.
So we've started on a nice morbid, horrible note.
Yeah.
Do you mean to continue this way, Robert Sherman?
I don't. It's not incredibly morbid. It's Barry's kind of a similar character though. It's interesting.
Oh, really?
The name Barry evokes a certain character, I think, in a lot of people.
Yeah. I'm not sure if my Barry really lives up to any of that, actually.
Well, that's good, because we want some variation. Yeah. But it will be interesting to see how we respond to the same themes. Yeah. Do you want me to... do you just want me to read it from your lap?
If we perch it there, I'm just perching the laptop on both of our knees.
I feel really left out. I'm outside of this intimacy.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so mine is called Barry Makes a Hideous Discovery. Okay. Barry's mother hated pine cones. She didn't see the point of them. This was partly because she had failed to pay attention in biology and bobbed through life ignorant of the intricate artistry of seed dispersal and the proliferation of forests, but also because of the simple fact that she did not look where she was walking. When she was pregnant with Barry, she and Barry's father, whose name, as you will come to see, is the least important part of this story, lived in the grounds of her parents' house in a conifer forest. It was a beautiful little conifer wood cabin with hand-split slates on the roof, and she hated it. She dreamed of a house with whitewashed walls, tile floors, and a veranda looking out on the Caspian Sea, but her mum and dad had very selfishly decided not to buy her one. And so every time she walked to the main house to steal some milk, waddling under the weight of Barry's growing head and feet, tired from the internal suckling that he was engaged in, she would tread on every pine cone available. She would spend 20 minutes sat in the light from the fridge, picking fragments out of her heel and swearing very loudly. Her mouth was often pressed against her enormous stomach when she did this, which might explain why Barry's vocabulary was rather wide when he did pop out. The day of that popping, Barry's mother's water broke as she was eating a huge curry in front of the television. She had envisioned herself collecting water from a stream or on a crowded bus or somewhere more exciting when the big moment did finally come. But there was nothing for it. They had to go. Barry's father, a whimpering, parasitic sort of man, helped her out to the car. It was late summer, and pine cones were clustered like granola, which, being greedy and stupid, she hated. She resolved to dodge past every single one of them, and on livid purple tiptoes, one hand across her stomach, she did so until she was trying to lever herself through the passenger door. She slipped, and one foot went down, splintering one particularly vicious specimen all through her foot. She screamed, cried, and in that one moment turned all of her hate inwards on her baby. She was not a monster. She didn't punch herself or try and throw him down a well. He lived a very normal, quite populated childhood, and she never left him alone with the curling tongs just to see what would happen. She had a small mind, however, and the worst thing that she could think of, the very best way to scapegoat him, was to give him the name which has weighed him down his entire life. Barry hates Barry. He has had girls laugh at him, prospective employers breeze past him, and life generally pass him by. He became a builder just because he could not think of anything else that a man named Barry could possibly do with his life. And when he finally did find a wife, she insisted on calling him Bear, which was somehow even worse. They rented a diabolically ordinary flat in Mile End, and he could not remember the last time his wife had not seen him splattered with paint. His wife's name does not matter either. what would come to matter, as Barry would discover, was Barry. Barry was in his early 40s when he made his hideous discovery. It was 2 weeks after his birthday when he got so drunk that he had wept like an opera singer before sobering up very quickly and telling his boss's wife that she looked like Colonel Gaddafi. He had been sacked on the Monday and was now working cash in hand somewhere in the marshes of Essex, retarring a roof for a mad old artist. It was awful work, the sort of work that, had Barry not thought that a man named Barry shouldn't read someone like William Blake, that William Blake would have ascribed to his poor little children. Hot, curling flakes of tar like licorice would land on his arms, fusing all of the hair together in little dreadlocks that he had to cut off with nail scissors when he got home. This was invariably after midnight, and as he stood on the inadequate scaffolding, he was never very good at fitting it together, but then what do you expect? He wasn't allowed Lego as a child. With the sun going down on his back, smoking all over like a rather morose fat hellhound. He did what men have been doing since they stood up straight and strode out of Africa. He looked up at the stars and considered his lot. It wasn't an appalling life. His grandparents' wealth had filtered down to him in part when his mother had finished spending it by kindly dying, and his wife had parts of her that were still pretty. He didn't have any peculiar sexual urges, and he could still see his knees when he bent over in the shower. Life was, if not good, at least life. He thought about the legions of starving Guatemalans that he had seen on the news last night. The war was dragging on, he dimly perceived, and he had felt embarrassed by how disgusted he was by their gummy mouths, dripping noses, and gushing sores. Things could be a lot worse. Of course, there were not many stars this close to London. When he peered over the gable, he could see a few more. He did not know their names, or which constellations they were part of. Nobody called Barry became an astronomer. Only men called Tycho or Artemis became astronomers. But still, he could appreciate them, and he set down his tar gun, pulled off his ridiculous little felt hat that kept his balding pate warm on nights like this, and moved his eyes between them one after another. He wasn't sure what it was about them, but something felt wrong. He looked back and forth, roving, trying to capture the sensation again, but it was no use. He sighed and leant back, and then realised just how shit he was at putting up scaffolding. It collapsed quietly, and he fell 2 stories to the ground below. The pain was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. He desperately searched his mouth for blood, but there was none, and in his delirium he considered biting down on his tongue so that he could spit out a mouthful of blood as they did on television, and flash a gory spread of smile, but he didn't in the end. He lay there, his broken back, ignored by the zooming cars and the deaf, possibly stoned artist in his armchair in the loft space, and began to die. He could see more and more of the stars now, and it was then that something very important and very hideous was revealed to him. His brain seared back through time to the very beginning of the universe, or at least what he assumed was the beginning. He had heard that one's life was supposed to flash before their eyes, but he was certain that he had never been a small amorphous blob of protein in a sea of methane. Back and back it went, the Earth shrinking underneath, the magma bubbling, floating back into space, and then slipping down a plug hole larger than anything Barry had ever seen. And then, there it was, hung like a drop of semen in the nothingness, the potential universe. Barry tried to whistle, but farted instead. The broken back had done more than make him hallucinate. It had replumbed his insides as well, apparently. And then the universe began. An explosion that Barry could not describe, did not have the words for, that nobody had the words for. But just before, at the very moment of release, he heard a quiet sound, the very first sound that ever was. Bear. It began to pick up speed. The Earth was formed. He whisked past the blob of protein again, saw fish, reptiles, animals mating, meteors, fire, skeletons, ash, a cathedral of some kind. A man stood before a crowd of thousands, his own birth, his death, here tonight on the lawn of the artist beside his plastic flamingo, and then on, the future, spacecraft, bizarre creatures, and then the end. A drifting, vapid winking out of life. As the last bacteria curled up and crinkled, and the universe became its own morgue, he heard another sound, the complement to that first, the sound that ends all life. Re. Bear and Re. Barry took a moment and then realised what you and I already have. His name was the universe. Beginning and end, Alpha and Omega, a phrase he had heard his grandfather say at the dinner table but did not understand. Barry was all. He was briefly proud at the cosmic sentience of his mother, but then he remembered that he had never really liked her, and besides his back was broken and he might have soiled himself after that fart. And he knew something else then, something worse. He did not know how he could know it, but he did. He remembered that his wife had never called him by his full name. The night he had met her, she had been drunk and immediately saddled him with a contraction, and he had never corrected her. That single syllable, the birth of the universe, had accompanied her llama-like laugh all the way through their relationship. Bear, bear, bear. He barely remembered what colour eyes she had sometimes, and now he remembered that. A new scaffold of pain shot through his shoulders, and he marvelled at how interesting it was to feel something. The pain brought something else. another secret. He knew that his name was important now, more than important, and unwittingly or not, his wife had performed a function as galactically important as the supernovaing of stars. She had never said the fateful syllable. If she had ever finished his name, she would have finished everything. It was just as well that she was so annoying. All this time, she had saved the universe every day. He knew that everything would be all right. She would never say it. His name was the cipher of everything that had ever been. He held the code that would destroy galaxies in his ridiculous, spiteful name, the name that his mother had given him because she had hated pine cones so much. Later on, when he had lost a lot more blood, the ambulances came. The artist must have looked out through his fog of smoke to see his builder spread-eagled in the grass. He heard the women, all the paramedics' women, murmuring that they couldn't lift him, that he would die if they lifted him, and they stood around awkwardly, waiting for the crane to arrive, while the artist crept between them with steaming mugs of tea, trying to invite them up to his bedroom. He was on the cusp of going, his eyes fluttering shut, safe in the knowledge that everything would be all right without him, when his wife appeared. She leant over him, eyes full and crinkled, lip quivering, apparently in love with him. She did not say it very often. Her tears fell on his lip, and he wished more than anything that he could move, and wipe them away. The blue lights danced in her highlights, and the strange growling whispers of the female paramedics provided a background hiss to what she whispered to him, just as everything stopped. "Oh, Bear. Oh, my precious Bear. Oh, Bar..."
Mine isn't as long as that. Mine's only like 2 and a bit pages, but
That's fine.
I write quite fast.
I think I write kind of slowly, but also I was writing on the iPad. I was typing with the iPad keys, and actually that is kind of harder.
It is. It slows you down.
I think I could have said more, but it would have been just expanding on the basic thing anyway. So
Give it a go.
anyway, I didn't think of a title at the time, but I want to call it the Fox Party.
Okay, that's
There we go.
That's a good party.
Reasons
Like it.
that
Good
will
party.
become clear.
Good party.
Yeah.
Okay.
Barry was usually the first person awake in their house, but he slept in the Monday before Declan, his son, started at secondary school. It being that rare British treat of a bank holiday, a Monday not spent in the office, he felt he deserved it even though he rarely slept in, his body conditioned to rise for work even when work was held off for a day. He'd gotten to bed late on the Sunday before, however, as he'd been kept awake by the sounds of foxes in their garden. Despite his best efforts to keep the beasts away and the ever-increasing amount of money spent on repellent products, he couldn't get rid of them. Most nights they could be heard, screaming and howling like dogs being boiled, but last night had been a cacophony like no other, a foul, violent orgy from the sound of it. When Barry eventually slept, the months of weariness built up from commuting finally hit his body, and he snored for almost 10 hours. He was awoken by his wife, Suzanne, around 10 in the morning. He opened his eyes to find her face, beautiful despite the morning's red puffiness, looking sombre. "The foxes had quite a party last night," she said. "Did they now?" said Barry, sitting up. They got to Benny and Billy." "Shit. Did Dex see?" "I think so. When I came down, he was looking out of the window. And then when I came in, he just turned around and said good morning, as if nothing had happened." "And now?" "He's reading in the sitting room. I told him to stay in there until you came down." "Keep him in there, and I'll sort out the garden." "Thanks." She kissed him on the forehead. "Coffee?" "Sure." He hauled himself out of bed, put on a dressing gown, and followed her downstairs. He found Declan in the front room, still in his pyjamas, curled up on the sofa reading The Hobbit, which had been a gift from Barry for his birthday last week. He was engrossed, so Barry didn't disturb him. He was keen to see the damage done to the garden and to clear it up as quickly as possible. Benny and Billy had been Declan's guinea pigs, and they'd both died 2 weeks ago and caused a flood of tears and howling from Declan that Barry hoped never to see repeated. Barry knew as soon as he entered the dining room and saw the garden through the French windows that there was no way Declan hadn't seen what had happened. The lawn, which he'd cut last week and was still short, was littered with what could have been miscellaneous nondescript garbage from a torn bin bag, as usually was found after a fox party, but were unmistakably an assortment of small grey bones. It could perhaps have been the remnants of a KFC, but the sheer quantity was staggering. Barry had no idea that guinea pigs had that many bones. What was clearly not, or had never been, part of a chicken was the roughly tennis ball-sized lump of brown fur that sat, surrounded by flecks of crayon-like blood, on the beige stone patio, not a foot from the door. Barry looked closely and then wished he hadn't. Past flies and protruding bones, he spotted a grey streak in the fur above the ear that marked it out as Benny, and his eye connected with Benny's, staring in death as it had done in life, blank but nervous, black and empty. Further back were other patches of fur and flesh, and parts he could identify as Billy's hindquarters and paws, and behind them a hole underneath the hedge, the grave from which the pet's corpses had been dug up. The 2 sticks that Declan had arranged in a cross to mark the grave were torn asunder. Barry sighed as Suzanne placed his coffee down on the table. "Why today, of all days?" he asked. Suzanne offered no words in return, but rubbed his shoulder before going off to play with Declan. Barry got a pair of rubber gloves and a bin bag from the kitchen and set about picking up bits of flesh and bone from his garden. He scrubbed the patio clean, gagging at the smell of death and fox piss. He filled in the grave, now empty, and replaced the sticks. When he came in and had washed his hands and disposed of the guinea pig bits, Suzanne called to him from the other room that Declan had something to show him. He entered to see his son in secondary school uniform for the first time, beaming as Barry hadn't seen him beaming since before the death of Benny and Billy. "I'm ready for big school, Dad," he said excitedly, thumbing in the pockets of his shiny new blazer, resplendent with the school's crest on the pocket. "You sure look like you are," said Barry. "Can we play in the garden now? I need to practice my passing for football." "Sure, let's go, but not in your uniform." Declan changed into shorts and a t-shirt, and they returned to the garden. Barry was hoping Declan wouldn't ask anything, and he didn't for the whole time they were out, passing the ball back and forth. When they finished and were heading back inside, Declan took one last look back at the grave. "Dad," he asked, "did the foxes dig up Benny and Billy?" Barry looked down at his son, expecting to see him welling up, his eyes big, his lip trembling, but he was calm. Nothing unusual except the flush of exercise. "Yes, they did. I'm sorry." "That's okay. I'm sad they're gone, but I know the foxes didn't mean to upset me. I'll miss Benny and Billy, but I know they've gone to a better place." "Well, yes, I suppose that's right." "What's for lunch, Dad?" "Ask your mother." And as Declan went inside, that was the end of the matter. As he closed the French window, also taking one last look at the grave, Barry knew that when Declan had told him, in his blazer and tie, that he was ready for big school, that he had been right.
That is the sweetest story about foxes digging up decomposing bodies I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's the nicest story with the words fox piss.
I was expecting the child when you said, I think I've been poisoned by mine and Rob's stories, but when you said that he had something to show him in the living room, that he was going to come in and he'd made like a hideous doll out of the remains and said, "Look, Daddy, they've come back to life." And then his head would spin on his shoulders or something.
Oh, he's got like the face of a fox in his school uniform.
Yes. "Hello, Dad." Because that's how foxes talk.
That is how they talk.
That was based on...
That's very sweet.
Well, the foxes digging up the guinea pig bones did actually happen to me.
I was going to say that sounds like something that would have happened to you.
I don't know. For some reason, that was in my head when you said hideous discovery, because I have this memory of coming downstairs and seeing the bones all over the lawn and being like, "What the fuck?"
It's funny that you said that yours is based on real life, because I actually do bathe in congealed milk to maintain my youth.
That's why I have not been in the bathroom here.
After this, we're going to all go and take a bath in the milk, and then we'll all look like Harry Styles.
We can only hope. He is the paragon of youth.
Maybe that's his secret.
I think his secret is that he's like 10 years old. And it's not a secret.
Really, he's 18.
Yeah, that's true. He cracks open his female fans like a flare and eats them down.
Yeah. So that's where mine came from. Anyway, it's kind of a fictionalized version.
That was
of
very good.
That thing that happened to me. I wasn't that torn up about it really. I think I was just a bit, it's kind of disgusting really. So I thought I'd make it about growing up and stuff.
I like that it didn't go hideous
at the end.
Yeah, I was expecting something much worse than that. But it was great. It's great. I loved it. Cool.
I kind of wanted to do something hideous like what you guys would have done, but I couldn't bring myself to make the whole thing hideous. I just thought I'd describe some guinea pig parts and that'd be it. Really.
I think I did quite well not to make mine too hideous.
No, it wasn't at all.
I think I managed to restrain myself.
I'm pleased at how hideous mine was.
Oh yeah, well, you were expecting that.
I'd have expected nothing less.
Good.
Right, so the next one will be... we decided on it, didn't we?
Did we?
Yeah, we
Yes,
decided.
you decided.
I don't believe I was consulted.
You were.
You were
were
consulted.
My favourite gland.
Oh yes, I
Yeah.
was consulted.
So
I laughed at that.
The
very
theme.
much.
The theme for the next one is my favourite gland, and we'll record that whenever.
Yeah, we'll record that. We'll try and do one every month or
Yeah,
so.
that would be-
That's
that'd be good.
reasonable.
Yeah. Well, when we see each other and we've got an hour to sit and read,
Yeah.
and then 40 minutes to record one, then that's
Yeah,
or even half an hour. Cool.
that's good.
Well,
Yeah. So
Great.
if you want to like us and hear more of us, the best way is to be on Twitter. Is it right? Should we say?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
on Twitter at Paddy Johnston.
I'm at Rob_Sherman, like the tank.
I am at Robert_Gordon_.
So yeah, if you like the podcast, follow us and tweet us and keep in touch.
Okay.
Right, thanks.
Bye.